Hello everyone and welcome to House, the Shared Living podcast. This is episode 10 in our 6th season and we're back again for another week of the latest news, views and insights from the rented shared living sectors. We cover PBSA, BTR, co-living, university accommodation, HMO and rented later living sectors. So if this is where you work, you are in the right place. I'm Sarah Canning from the Property Marketing Strategist.
I'm Dan Smith from Resi Consultancy and VerbaFlow AI.
And I'm Deanie Lee from the Property Marketing Strategists.
Let's hear from our headline sponsor, My Student Halls.
Housed is sponsored by Spotlight Boost on mystudenthalls.com. Use Spotlight Boost to stand out in search results and drive more leads to your properties.
We're delighted that Dan and the team from My Student Halls have decided to be our headline sponsors once again. They are such a key part of the student accommodation marketing cycle. We recommend that everybody has them in their marketing plans. They are great partners to us at Housed, and I'm sure that they will be great partners for you all as well. And a huge thank you to Wash Station, Utopia and Howden. More from them later. So Dan, you may have mentioned once or twice in the last episode that you were in Vegas. What exactly were you doing there?
Glad you are. So I was at RETCON, Real Estate Technology Conference, which is one of the larger prop tech conferences in the US, and it was our opportunity to launch VerbaFlow properly out there. So I've just hired a head of US there, Jennifer Love, and she's learning the ropes. Obviously, she's got straight into it and is very focused on it. Her background is prop tech, so it was a really good opportunity to get on stage to find out where they're up to across the board. Because I tell you, the UK and Europe are so far behind where the US is when it comes to AI adoption in particular. And I think the US is kind of seen as the holy grail for any prop tech company. So that's why there's a lot more testing, and there are a lot more features that typically the property management systems tend to roll out there as well. So it was really interesting to see where they're up to. And it's moved beyond AI in particular, has moved beyond the sort of FOMO phase that I think the UK and Europe are in, where innovators feel like they have to have it. They don't necessarily need to check it in terms of the ROI or anything like that. And I think we've actually moved beyond that now in the UK and Europe too. But we're very much into that phase of show me the ROI. What are the costs? What's this going to look like long term? What does this mean for the operational platform? And they're really starting to look quite heavily at savings in particular, whether that be savings on structure and people or savings on tech and systems. So that's the difference. But the market difference is quite clear. The US market has traditionally been very decentralized across multifamily and student housing. Now it's becoming more centralized again, and virtually all of the panels mentioned centralization in some way, shape or form. So I was able to sit there, with European experience and say, look, it's all centralized in Europe. We don't give too much power to the assets, and by power I mean a huge amount of decision making or full budgetary control to a general manager, or the sort of oversight of leasing, for example. So the US companies are starting to try and really bring that into sort of an HQ team, as well as streamlining some of their operations at the property as well. So just really interesting to see what was going on in the market. In terms of anything insightful that came from it, I think we're nearly there in terms of catching up with some of it. US has always typically been ahead. There's still very much a focus on AI, and that's across the entire end-to-end life cycle. So a lot of the focus there was actually on investment decisions and development and planning support, and that was really interesting to see quite how far ahead they are. I think we are actually reasonably spoiled in terms of the university data that we have, which I can't believe I'm saying that. But in the US, they don't have anybody aggregating any of the enrollment data or anything like that. And that's where in the UK, yes, it's typically quite slow to come through and it should be real time. But, we have more data in that respect. So that sort of shone through that, there's a bit of a gap there. But yeah, overall, really good event. I was massively jet lagged, actually. It was a real tough one from that perspective, but don't feel too sorry for me. I was in Vegas. So yeah, it was good fun. Well worth getting out there for. Definitely do it again. And just glad to have got Jennifer onboarded and out into the public.
Great. Well, I was somewhere just as glamorous this week, although I didn't have jet lag. I was in Leeds, and I was there doing some more planning for our UK Reef Housed Summit. It was great being back in the department in Leeds and kind of seeing our venue and looking at all the branding opportunities for our partners. It's really starting to take shape. I think we can really visualize it coming together now. So we haven't quite gone to print yet on all of our branded items. So if anybody is still looking to partner, you still absolutely have an opportunity to, but only probably for another few weeks before we have to hit go on all of the designs. But anyway, on with the show. So one thing that I actually saw it a few weeks ago and we'd not been able to cover it yet on Housed. There was an article that was written by Alex McCann, which is called Will I Ever Own a Home? And I know that this is something that we've come back to quite a lot over nearly 100 episodes of Housed, is kind of how renting is quite often seen as the poor relation of buying. Should we be normalizing renting? And rather than kind of seeing it as something that is less than or is a poor relation to selling. And the article here is quite interesting because it talks about it being a generational problem, basically, and that it's something that's probably being driven by sort of parents of 20, 30-year-olds who that aspiration of owning a home was everything. And in this article refers to the kind of the right to buy in the 80s, where 2 million council homes were sold at discounted prices. And home ownership at that stage climbed to a peak of 71% by 2003. And an entire generation bought property for the first time. So it feels a little bit like that was a kind of an artificial blip. That was something that was kind of driven by the government, and it was almost like a once in a generation opportunity to do that. But now the average house in London costs 523,000. The median salary is 44,370 £. By the Resolution Foundation's estimate, only 4% of young non-home owners currently have the savings and the earnings required to buy a typical first-time buyer home in their region. And if you save 10% of your gross income every year, you'd still be looking at well over a decade just to accumulate a deposit. And that assumes house prices stay flat. So do you agree, really? Is this generational? In this article, he talks also about a psychological impact to this. Do people just need to adjust their expectations? He cites that 86% of 18 to 24-year-olds still aspire to own a home. But how?
I think that's the psychological mismatch, is that there's a generational shift, that people who have children that are starting to think about buying a home, got their career settled and ready to do that, they've grown up in a family where that was the thing that was done, and that's what you aspired to do, and that's why you worked hard at school, and that's why you got a job, and that's your reward for it. But I think the problem is that many of those parents know it's hard, but probably don't know how hard it is until they start getting down that route. And I think that's the psychological issue, is that everything you've been told and all the points of doing that, you're not going to get. It's really hard to get that reward now. You don't automatically get it by working hard. And this is something I can't remember I mentioned last week, but I went into my children's school last week to talk about my career. And one of the things that I wanted to get across to them was that I've worked hard and had jobs before I had proper jobs as a teenager in order to be a success. But if you do all that and then you can't actually get the golden nugget that you've been told is the golden nugget, that's quite a difficult thing to then think, actually, how do I reframe my life and that reward and that success?
I think it is a generational thing, and I think the boomers have absolutely shafted everyone. And it is not consciously, it's just a product of circumstance, and the timing was perfect for them to make significant amounts of money. And I read an article at the weekend, actually, with Lawrence Llewellyn-Bowen, and he was saying, he's got a couple of nice houses, he's done unbelievably well there, he's made more out of the property transactions than he has out of any TV work, etc. Buying a property 15 years ago in Cornwall for 150 grand, and more recently, that's now worth 800,000. That is just insane. And it's not just, we're not just talking about holiday lets in Cornwall. We are talking across the board. Property appreciation has been absolutely incredible. And I think that generation has just coined it in, absolutely coined it in. And I, on a personal level, I've done okay out of property transactions, but that's not what I look upon it for. But I have that mindset of, I should own my own home. Like, especially at 40 something years old, I want to be settled. I want to know that I am that I can treat it almost like a savings account. Yes, of course, ridiculous interest at the moment, and that doesn't look like going anywhere anytime soon, thanks to Donald Trump. But I think the issue with renting obviously is that you're paying off someone else's mortgage. You're investing for someone else, and that, I think, is where we still have a huge amount of work to do to make sure that renting isn't seen just as transient, just as a stepping stone, just as, something that you do because you can't afford your own house. I think it can offer a huge amount of flexibility, and for the right people at the right time, renting is definitely the right way to go. But in the UK, we've still got that, that kind of snobby approach to it. Whereas in Europe, it's very different. Like, many more people rent, and that's something that I think we need to take into account, the fact that it is a very, very good option for people at a certain time. But why aren't we seeing people think, I can just rent forever, that's what I'll do, rather than it being something that they can't afford to do, to buy a house, and therefore that's why they rent. I think making it more of a lifestyle choice, I think that's going to be one of the more difficult things.
And I think that's the point that's made in this article. And this is the narrative about renting that isn't getting out there and still isn't getting out there, is actually there are massive lifestyle benefits to renting. And one of those is that by having a mortgage, you have no flexibility. And for 25 years, you've got to make sure that there is a salary payment going into your account on the first of the month to cover your mortgage payment. With renting, whilst you still have that ability, you have the flexibility to say, actually, I want to go off and have a career change. And it might earn me less money, but I'm going to be much happier. Or actually, I want to go off and do travelling for a bit. So I can do that because I don't have a mortgage payment around my neck that I've got to make. And I think this is the flexibility that the Europeans understand and the benefits around it. And I just don't think we have that narrative in the UK, because we've got this generational aspiration that is what we do, and that's how we secure our future, and that's how we make sure that we move forward. And life can be different in different things, and we don't have to sit in a job for 30 years. Actually, you can chop and change your careers and do different things. And that's the point that I think this article makes well. And I think that's the narrative that from a rental perspective, we need to get out there, that actually it's not a low-end option. It's a different option that gives you a lot of benefits and flexibilities that you wouldn't have if you went down the buying a house route.
I agree. That's what the article is kind of pushing here, really. But they say that 20-somethings seem confused about the careers, and he doesn't blame that on the education system. He says he's starting to think the housing market belongs in that conversation because it removes that financial anchor that gave an entire generation's working lives their structure, which is what you're saying, Dini. But I had a really interesting conversation with Hashi Mohammed, who is going to be one of our speakers at UK Reef. And he absolutely kind of is an advocate for renting and renters' rights. But he said he thinks that there should be options, basically, that it shouldn't be that people can't buy a house because they have no other option. Renting might be the right option for some people, but it shouldn't be because there is no other option. And so really it's a failing of viable options for buying that means that people could have a choice. I'm going to rent for my lifestyle options, or I'm going to buy, rather than having absolutely no choice in the matter at all.
I completely agree, but I just, we cannot, and I don't think we'll find a good way to do this, and this is me being pessimistic, I don't think we'll find a way to make people okay with the fact that you're paying off someone else's mortgage and that you're investing into their pension fund as a landlord, for example. When you're a tenant, you are paying off someone else's mortgage, you are putting money in their bank. I think that's seen as subservient. I think that's seen as, as paying for someone else's lifestyle or someone else's, like I said, someone else's pension fund. And I think that is the ultimate barrier that we have. Like, why would you rent when you could buy? Now, the reason that you would rent rather than buy is because of a certain circumstance in your life. Maybe you have a slightly transient job, or you travel a lot for work, or maybe you're going through a divorce or something along those lines. Like, I can understand some of that. But I think that's one of the key issues that's the psychological barrier that we would need to find a way to break down. I just don't see how we could do it. As much as we want to put flexibility out there and all of those other positive things, that feels like it's about a specific time in someone's life rather than a long-term plan. I don't know. What do you think, Deanie?
Well, does that change though if it's an institutional investor and it's not a person down the road that I'm paying off their mortgage, that actually it's a business? I mean, there's always going to be a thing about landlords making money, whether they're institutional investors or whether they're one person down the road. But does it shift and change when it's a company, a corporation doing it? Or is it a corporation that's backed by government policy? Does that shift and change it? Because it's still something you need to build.
I think that's a brilliant point. And in my head, instantly, I'm thinking, I'm much happier paying into, somewhere that is institutional capital and paying rent there rather than just a sort of mom and pop landlord where I'm enriching someone. And I used to see it at Loughborough. A couple of when I was at university, some of the student HMO landlords driving around in their Lamborghinis and just thinking, I can't tell you what I was thinking, but I think that's what everyone assumes is happening. Not every landlord, of course, is driving around in their Lambos buying Bitcoin, but I think that's the real frustration. So yes, with more institutional capital coming in, and also interestingly, some of these new providers who are sort of helping people save to buy as well. So you rent, and then a portion of your rent goes into an ISA, and it may be 10%, it may be whatever. And then within a certain period, maybe 3 years, maybe 5 years, you have enough for a deposit. I think that's going to become more and more attractive. We know that because of the amount of people that have reached out to us about that for UK REEF. We've had a lot of interest there. So I'm really interested to see how that can kind of turn things around to say, right, we're now looking at, yes, institutional capital. And I think that's much more attractive than just paying into, the pension fund of a mum and pop landlord. And also then these save to buy schemes. I think that's going to become really, really important for people over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. And it may well start to bridge that gap and make renting ladder up to something. And I think that's what a lot of people are looking for it to do. Be that stopgap, be that stepping stone, and then you'll be able to buy your property. Whether that's ultimately healthy or not, I don't know. I'm clearly still in the mindset that owning a property is good. Like that's just how I've been brought up. And I think it'd be very difficult to kick that psychological barrier. But I do also appreciate, the flexibility that comes with renting. But yeah, Deanie, great point there, I think.
And I'm sure that we will keep coming back to that. And as we said, we'll be covering lots of those types of topics at UK REEF. We're now going to hear from our sponsors and partners for the Shared Living Summit, Utopia.
Utopia is the trusted partner for high-performance asset management, cutting energy costs, reducing risk, and delivering proven ESG results.
With billions of data points and 75,000 rooms monitored, Utopia turns real-time intelligence into measurable value, protecting investments and driving continuous improvement.
Choose intelligence that delivers. Choose Utopia. Thank you so much for Utopia for being a great sponsor and partner of us. They make data acquisition, analysis and action simple for real estate investors, asset managers and operators. Now, we're going to talk about another topic here, which I found really interesting. It was an article by Wonky. We cite them a lot because they do really cover some interesting things. They were talking about a piece of research by Centre for Cities that showed that in university towns and big cities, nearly 60% of city centre residents are aged between 18 and 29. In cities without universities, that figure falls to just 20%. So when we're talking about kind of the high street investment, kind of regeneration, it's really clear that universities have a massive impact in cities. They shape the pedestrian flows and consumption, shopping, accommodation, obviously, and suggested that they might be feeling a bit too much of the pressure, that they should and could revive the high street effectively. But is that the university's responsibility? Where does kind of, I guess, campus and city centre start and stop? I guess it's that whole town and gown argument, really. What do you both think?
This also, to me, talks about issue around student migration. And what we're already seeing is that more and more students are choosing to stay at home domestically. And therefore, that's stopping that migration. So whilst we can see the benefit of having that cohort of younger people in these cities, we're going to see that less and less if we are making it so expensive to go and study that actually people choose not to study. And then that becomes a student migration issue. And we're probably going to start closing off more of our city centres. I kind of feel that there is a benefit in that mix of demographic coming together in a city for all sorts of reasons, on spending, on diversity of places, on kind of changing and bringing more people into city centres to do different things, along with networking and enterprise and all those things. They're all positive things. When it comes to high streets, personally, I have a real view that as a society, we all need to protect our high streets. And I don't think we all do that, because I think we all love online shopping, and I'm part of that too. I mean, I don't have a high street near me, so I do more online shopping. But I think that as a society, we're going to be really sorry if we don't have these high streets. And if you don't have people out and about and milling and people coming in and out in cities, then what are our high streets for?
So I grew up in Thanet in Kent, and you have Margate, Broadstairs and Ramsgate, which were two sort of nice high streets. And then you have Westwood Cross, which is just this gigantic shopping centre that they built. And it's just sucked all of the life out of every single town. And I know that has happened to every high street, whether there's a university or not. It's been a real struggle competing with the out of town shopping centres in particular. But you only have to go to somewhere like Southampton to see the impact of student life on the high street. You walk up and down the high street, and I'd say the majority of people that you see are students. And that is because Southampton Solent in particular is pretty close, but a lot of students for Southampton University, which is about a 25-minute bus ride out the city centre, actually live within the city centre, whether that's in HMO or PBSA, or more recently in BTR with the Compass Rock property that's there. And I think Southampton's always had a very strong contingent of Chinese students. You look at the amount of bubble tea shops, or sort of Chinese bakeries or Chinese restaurants, and you see the impact that international students in particular have there. And with the way things are now, you do start to see some cities that are similar to Southampton in that way, where the Chinese student numbers have either dropped or certain other demographics have dropped. And it is more of a struggle for those to stay afloat. I think that we do see changing demographics, and we do see that, some of the high streets are, some of those bubble tea shops, for example, are closing down. And I do worry for the rest of the high streets. You look at literally any city with a strong university presence, if those numbers do start to drop, and obviously the affordability is a key issue as well, but if those numbers do start to drop and less people are going to university, they are propping up the high street. You do see that across the board, in particular from a hospitality perspective. So I think there will be some more casualties to come, and I think they will be in cafes and restaurants. And we know that nightlife has been absolutely decimated across the UK, and that might be in part due to changing preferences of young people, but also students as well. A bit more of a focus on studying rather than socialising so much. So yeah, I do worry for the high street. I think that changing demographics is a major problem. I think more apprenticeships will again be more of a problem, and the hospitality will bear the brunt of it. So it's going to be a challenge maintaining any high street across the UK, but I think in particular those that are really overexposed to students, as I said, like somewhere like Southampton in particular.
Isn't it chicken and egg though? Because the stronger the pull of the town, the stronger the pull of the university as well. And so on that respect, I don't think it's the university's responsibility to keep the high street alive, but I do think there is a connection between the attractiveness of a city and why somebody would go there as a student. I think it depends the type of the university. So, for example, we've done some work with a PBSA operator that is in a city where there is a campus university. It's got everything that a student would possibly want on that campus. And we did a photo shoot and a video shoot with the students. And we said, we're going into the city centre to capture lifestyle there. And they said, we never go into the city centre. We go to the supermarket, but they don't hang out in the city centre. A lot of them were international students, and they cited how undiverse that city is. There isn't the food preferences or cultural preferences that a lot of those students like and enjoy. They get a lot of that on the campus, but they don't get a lot of that in the city. So I don't think it's completely disconnected, and I don't think it's necessarily about consumerism. I don't think we can assume that anymore because the cost of living is so expensive. I don't think students have that extra income to be spending in the high streets, but for their needs, for their necessities, for their, maybe their food needs or hairdressing needs or prayer needs and community needs, those things quite often are found outside of the campus. And if students can't find those in the city that they want to go to, then maybe that city isn't the right city for them.
That's kind of the point, is that we need to, if we want people to go away and study, it's not just about the university, it's about where they're going to go. We need to make them attractive and welcoming and exciting. And it's quite a shame, actually, that you've got students in a city centre in the UK or near a city centre in the UK and not utilising it and not experiencing it or not getting it, because it probably has got some things to offer, but we've got to make that more attractive, and we've got to build them around getting people back out to our city centres and making them part of our communities again.
Well, you look at the shopping centres, and Sunderland's not a bad idea, not a bad example. There's a Debenhams there that's been turned into student accommodation because obviously Debenhams is defunct, and I think that, again, is just a way to bring people into the city centre. And I think that's what we should be looking at. The cost of land typically is that much more expensive. So it's quite rare that you would develop PBSA within a very city centre. More people would typically look to build that little bit further out. And that's what will have the impact. So if your accommodation is that bit further out of the city centre, are you going to travel in all the time? No. If your accommodation is right in the city centre, you're already in the thick of it. You can contribute more meaningful to those communities. And yes, cost of living is an issue, but I think you're much more likely to say, yeah, let's just meet at the cafe, or let's just meet, at the bubble tea place, or whatever it might be. So I think there will be hopefully a bit more of a focus with retail, with the position that retail is in, and how that's faring, and the likes of the collapse of Debenhams and a lot of others looking on fairly shaky ground. There's definitely an opportunity there to make sure that we are drawing students into the city centre if they're not there already. But there are quite a lot of unis that do have their campuses within the very city centre, and I think that's something that could be an opportunity for a local council to incentivise a university to say, right, let's build this specific faculty campus building within the city centre to draw people in, because it's very, very difficult to get the general public into a city or a town centre at the moment, in particular a town centre actually. But yeah, all good points.
And let's not forget that the more attractive that city is, the more likely that city will attract graduates as well, and keep that population high as well for years after. So yeah, I think it's an interesting article, and again, we'll probably cover a lot of that at UK Reef. Now we're going to hear from another one of our sponsors.
Wash Station proudly sponsor this episode of Housed. We provide best-in-class laundry solutions that complement your buildings. Wash Station. Smart, green, clean.
Thank you, Wash Station. They are a leader in managed laundry services. They use smart technology to deliver reliable, efficient laundry solutions that put customers first. Thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, and we urge our listeners to reach out to Wash Station for all of their laundry needs. So just want to come to another article. It's by Wonky again, but it's talking about the post-16 education and skills white paper. And in it, it said that the government would work on the sector to draft a statement of expectation. And one quote that I love in this article, which is something that we've been talking about for ages, is you can't build a flexible learning system and leave the accommodation model frozen at, and they quote, sign a 52-week tenancy before you even know your timetable.
This is one of the key issues that we have. Like, they're totally right to be suggesting that, because students are demanding more flexibility. Not all students, let me be really clear. There are some that want and need 51 or 52-week contracts. Brilliant. But more and more students in particular are demanding flexibility. That's why a lot of them are going to BTR. It's not just because you get a washing machine in each flat, because you get a lot more flexibility there. You can sign shorter contracts, and with the renters' rights bill coming in, you will be able to check out with a certain period of notice. And I think that is, with 60 days notice. And I think that is going to be a major issue for PBSA to try and keep up, because we already saw last year the occupancy dropped about 6%. That was without flexibility really becoming a major issue in PBSA. If you now start saying, right, so the occupancy was a bit of a struggle because for myriad of reasons, if you start putting in more flexibility, how do you do that without cannibalizing the revenue? That's the challenge that we have. We talked about it last week when talking about the models of hybrid living and looking at the social hub. I know that investors will be concerned. If you start saying flexibility and affordability in the same sentence, everybody's going to start thinking, well, that's it. Those returns are gone. So we got to get super creative. And that's why, the likes of the social hub and Charlie and Frank and the team there have done so well, because they've built a model that really works, because it's built around hospitality, which isn't, just taking a PBSA rate, splitting it up into days and then selling it at that. It's taking a proper hotel rate and taking hotel management systems and styles and making that work. And I think that the worry that I've got is that the entire sector is now going to start thinking, great, so occupancy was a struggle last year. Now you're asking for flexibility. Where does this end?
But I think this comes to me being a broken record about the sector needs to take control of its own destiny. And the argument that we'll hear time and time again about I can't be creative, I can't be innovative, is because of planning, is because of regulation, is because of lots of other barriers in the way to achieving that. And that's why we need to go and we need to work together. Like everything we've spoke about in this episode around renting, and that we need to give renting a better story, that university towns, that students going into university towns and migrating add a role and have a benefit, and going away to study has a role and a benefit, and all that is changing and shifting. And the only way to keep up with that is to change and shift with it. And yes, it's going to be harder, and yes, we've got to be creative, and yes, we've got to think outside the box, and yes, we're going to have to challenge perceptions. And dare I say it, maybe the return isn't as great, but it can still be a return. But there is a benefit to all of these things working together. They can't be done in isolation. It can't be fixed by PBSA. It can't be fixed by universities. It can't be fixed by government. It's got to be fixed by all those people to come together and saying, hang on a minute, what future do we want for this? And how do we build it, and how do we get there? And what's the levers we can pull to change that and shift that?
In this article, they also finish off by saying, in an ideal world, the statement will include some recognition that accommodation planning needs to account for use cases that don't look like a full year tenancy, that placement students, part-time learners, students between contracts and students in crisis have residential needs that are currently no one is responsible to plan for, which I agree with. I mean, we've worked with some universities that don't allow students to stay over Christmas. We've got some clients that we've had who didn't recognise that international students actually have nowhere to go in that 52nd week between contracts. And we are starting to see that change. So I totally agree that there are different use cases, but I can't see how any of this is going to work for investors, developers and operators unless they all shift to that hospitality model that Dan was referring to. I understand how this is going to work for students and it's how it's in their benefit, but unless everybody shifts to a hospitality model, I still don't see how it's going to work financially for investors, developers and operators. It's definitely going to work in the favour of students and like this article cited, those kind of unstandard kind of contracts and needs, but it still puts financials in a really, really precarious position. And obviously it then becomes that chicken and egg thing, because if you don't have accommodation at all for students, then they lose a whole part of that experience. And financially, if operators can't afford, to do all the great things that they do for students that are living in their buildings, because they haven't got that guaranteed full year round occupancy, I don't know that there's an answer for it, really.
But I think that's the point that I'm making, is that we can't judge returns or revenue or investment on the current model we have. We've got to build something different, and it's still got to make money because no one's going to build it. But the way that it has worked is no longer working. And that might mean that some of the great things that we're currently doing have to be compromised. And we've got to understand the value of those things. We've got to understand actually who's benefiting from the things. Do we get value from that? Does the student get value from that? Do they want that? If the answer is no to some of those questions, then it gets stripped out, and it's just a completely different model. So I don't know whether that model can make money because I haven't seen the model or what that works or what that is. And I think that's the drawing bit, the blueprint that we need to go back to say, actually, what is going to work for this world? Because there is a requirement for this product. So how do we make it work? And that might mean completely changing what we do and what we know and what we currently have. And I will continue to say this, that apprentices, my view is the government are pushing apprenticeships more and more and more. They want people to work and earn as opposed to going down at a traditional academic degree. And they should be part of this conversation, because some of those people, if more people are going down that route, they are going to be the type of people that go, yeah, I want to do an apprenticeship degree, but I still want to move out if I can. And we need to include them in this conversation, because it's going to be a help to people, not a hindrance, I think.
I think you can make money from it, but I think you can make less. The yield profile and the return profile is very, very different. And I think this is where the investors are going to need to get their heads around what this looks like. If this is the journey, if this is the direction of travel that we need to go on, then so be it. Because ultimately, if you don't give students what they want, then you have no product market fit. And if that is, if students are leaning towards affordability as they've shown, but if they're, leaning towards much more flexibility, and you're not offering that, then you do not have a product market fit. And you can try and shoehorn that in based on your, previous return profile and what you thought that would look like and your underwriting, or you can adapt. And, the saying of adapt or die is very apt in this sense. We're not saying that, you need to be offering complete flexibility to students and you have to be able to take in 1 night, 2 night bookings or anything like that right now. But this is without doubt the direction of travel at the moment. Affordability and flexibility. We actually on Housed have been saying this for a couple of years. These are going to be the 2 key buzzwords that actually start to drive meaningful change within the industry. And I think that is going to scare a lot of people, a lot of investors in particular. But we need to find those models that work. But there's already one that's been proven. We talk about them all the time. And I think that we now need to show what that can look like. But it will be a brave investor, an operator that does that from the get-go and says, yep, flexibility. This is exactly what it looks like. It doesn't just look like semesters, because semesters are still a last resort. It doesn't just look like 40-week rather than 51-week contracts. It looks like something much more adaptable, much more suited to students in whatever guise that they are in, whether they be, you talk about apprenticeships as well, Deanie, and the apprenticeship degrees and how to entice them into student accommodation. Can they actually be in student accommodation? Government needs to really get involved there in quite a big way, because if they're going to be pushing apprenticeship degrees, which we think they are, then it's going to really hurt PBSA if we can't take them. And I think that's one of the key issues that needs to be addressed by the ARL, but also by UK RE or RE UK. And we have to do that now, because we're already starting to see the impact of that. So, yeah.
I mean, I've always said someone's got to be brave, but I now think it's both brave and smart to do this, because, as you say, Dan, the current product doesn't fit for purpose, so therefore it becomes obsolete. So it's both brave and smart to go down this route and see what is achievable, because I think something is achievable. And like you say, I agree, it probably doesn't earn as much return, but it can still earn a return.
And that's where we just need to rebalance, I guess, how we view the sector.
And I'm really looking forward to getting into this in more detail when we have our Lavender special in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, let's hear from another one of our sponsors, Howden. Howden is the 5th largest employee-owned business in the UK and one of the largest insurance groups globally. With over 60 years' experience, Howden's specialist education division delivers tailored insurance, risk management, and wellbeing solutions for the education sector.
They're the trusted partner of nearly 1,000 schools, colleges, universities, and student accommodation providers across the UK.
Howden helps owners and operators protect what matters most, and so they are the perfect sponsors for Housed. Thank you for coming on board for season 6.
Thank you so much, Howden, for sponsoring this. Howden are the absolute experts at student insurance, so please do get in contact with them for all of your block insurance needs. We have a last segment, which is talking about the Zoopla rental market report, which talks about all areas of renting. The key stats that I've pulled out are inquiries per property in the last quarter have fallen to 4.8, the lowest for 6 years. And rent growth has slowed to 1.9%, down from just 2.8% last year. So while conditions are improving, rental supply remains 23% below pre-pandemic levels, meaning rents are still expected to rise through 2026. The bit that I found really interesting is their reasons for this. They suggest that lower migration is one reason for this change. So migration rose sharply after the pandemic, which was, publicised a lot, that lots of people reconsidered their living choices and therefore moved, and it increased pressure on the rental market. But more recently, migration for work and study has fallen back sharply, potentially influenced by the number of commuting students, which is reducing the scale of competition for private rented homes. And at the same time, improved mortgage conditions have helped more renters buy their first home. So 3/4 of first-time buyers come from renting. And when they move into home ownership, the homes they leave behind become available to rent again. So this helps increase supply, boost choice, and reduces pressure on the pace of rental growth. So interesting things to look out for. Were there any statistics that jumped out for you both?
I think I found this quite interesting, and I kind of, obviously, it's still a shifting market. It's the rental growth is slowing, but we still don't have as many homes to rent as we did pre-pandemic, and there's lots of reasons why that shift is changing, as the article kind of talks about. And one of the things that was coming to my mind as you were talking there, and just based on our whole conversation, is that I guess one of the things is that, it's great to see that more people are moving into a mortgage because mortgage rates have come down, although did come down, but probably going back up now. But there's also an age thing here, isn't there? That actually probably those people moving into that mortgage are of a certain age that probably isn't in the 20 bracket. They're probably more in the 30 or 40 age bracket, because that's probably the age that we are now buying homes at. And I guess it just shows that we're still in this place where we just don't have things right when it comes to housing. I don't think we don't have the right policy in place. We're not building the right things. We can't build them affordable enough. And back to the conversation we had earlier is around that actually, are we, we need to build homes that people need to live in that they can afford. And there's two different things there. And I kind of feel that we're still very much both in a rental market and a build to sell market. We're still building the higher end stuff because that gets a better return. And actually, it's not that bit of the market that we need to build for. It's the other bit.
I totally agree, Deanie, and I think that we're again framing this entire debate completely wrong. We do not have a housing crisis; we have an affordability crisis, and I think that is one of the key things that we have to focus on. But how do you enable that? How do you empower developers to build affordable? Well, yeah, you can mandate it in place, or you can unlock planning, or you can incentivize with tax breaks and various other things, both from a rental and a typical house builder standpoint. I think there's the usual focus from the government on house building, and that's not necessarily what is needed. So again, it just needs root and branch review. Great that immigration has come down from a housing perspective. Like that's obviously going to help because the demand is waning there. But yeah, I think the whole thing needs to be boiled down to affordability, and it's the same in PBSA. We know that those high-end studios typically are the ones that have been traded in the past. It's the same with anything that's in BTR or anything that is being being built to sell. It is typically much more of a focus on the high end. So yeah, I think nothing new from it, but yeah, there's just a major affordability crisis across the board.
I guess to sum it up, it's there are some green shoots there. There's some positive stories, but that balance still isn't right. But we will keep an eye, obviously, on all of those rental statistics. We have come to the end of our episode. Thank you so much for listening, and we will be back next week for more news, views, and insights from the rented shared living sectors. Next week is our last episode for a couple of weeks while we take a break over Easter. But as I mentioned before, we are extending this season into April and May to include a Lavender special, a segment from Howden, and our 100th episode special. So please follow and subscribe to Housed so you don't miss out on any of these episodes. Thank you very much. See you next week.